You think signing papers makes you my husband? Clara's voice cut through the ranch house like a blade. Ethan slammed his fist on the table, the marriage certificate still wet with ink. I kept my land, you got a roof over your head. That's the deal. She stepped closer, her eyes burning with something that made his chest tighten. The deal was survival, Mr. Hale. But if you think I'm going to watch you destroy yourself with this bitter, lonely existence, you're wrong. He wanted to throw her out. Instead, he stood frozen, feeling something inside him crack open for the first time in 10 years. Before we continue with Ethan and Clara's story, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's dive into part 1. The ink was barely dry on the marriage certificate when Ethan realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. He'd expected gratitude, maybe some timid questions about where things were kept. What he got instead was Clara Whitfield standing in his kitchen with her arms crossed and her jaw set like she was about to negotiate a cattle contract. "The stove's been venting wrong for months," she said, running her finger along the wall. "You're wasting fuel and filling the house with smoke. I'll need tools to fix it." "I didn't bring you here to fix my stove." "No, you brought me here to save your ranch." She turned to face him, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest he didn't want to name. "So let me save it." He walked out before he could say something he'd regret. The woman had been in his house for 3 hours, and already she was rearranging everything he'd built. Ethan saddled his horse and rode out to the north pasture, where the morning sun was turning the Arizona landscape into liquid gold. This was his land. His father had died trying to hold on to it, and Ethan had spent the last decade making sure that sacrifice meant something. He didn't need some Philadelphia spinster telling him his stove was broken. But when he came back at noon, the kitchen smelled different, cleaner. The windows were open, and a fresh breeze was moving through the house like it hadn't done in years. Clara was outside, her sleeves rolled up, examining the chicken coop with the same intensity she'd given the stove. "These birds are half starved," she said without looking at him. "When's the last time you cleaned this out?" "They're alive, aren't they?" "Barely." She straightened up, brushing dust from her skirt. "You're losing eggs because they're stressed. I can fix this, but I'll need lime and fresh bedding." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "I've been running this ranch for 8 years without your help." "I can see that." Her eyes swept over the disorganized yard, the sagging fence rails, the tools scattered near the barn. "You've been surviving, Mr. Hale. That's not the same as thriving." "I didn't marry you for criticism." "No, you married me because Judge Morrison threatened to take your land for unpaid property taxes unless you proved you could establish a proper household." Clara stepped closer, and Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being pinned in place by nothing more than her steady gaze. "So here I am, establishing it. Unless you'd rather lose everything out of pride?" He wanted to argue. Instead, he grabbed his wallet and pulled out money for supplies. "Get what you need." "I'll need the wagon, and someone to drive it." "I've got work to do." "Then teach me to handle it myself." She held out her hand. "I'm not asking for favors, Mr. Hale. I'm asking for the tools to do my job." Ethan stared at her outstretched hand. In Philadelphia, she'd probably been considered too old, too plain, too independent for any decent man. Out here, standing in his dusty yard with the sun turning her brown hair to copper, she looked like something he'd never been allowed to want. He dropped the wagon keys into her palm without touching her. "Don't break anything." "I rarely do." She was gone before he could respond, and Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work while his mind kept circling back to the woman currently driving his wagon into town. He'd married Clara because he'd needed to meet the judge's requirements. That was the deal. legal on paper, separate in practice. She'd have her own room, her own life. He'd keep his land and his distance. But Clara Whitfield didn't seem to understand the concept of distance. By the time she returned, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. Ethan walked out to help unload the supplies and stopped short when he saw the wagon bed. Lime, bedding, seeds, lumber, paint, 3 lanterns, and what looked like an entire mercantile's worth of household goods. What the hell is all this? What we need. Clara climbed down from the wagon with more grace than he'd expected. The ranch house hasn't been properly maintained in years. I'm not living in squalor just because you've gotten used to it. I never said you could spend your money. She pulled out a ledger from her bag and handed it to him. Every purchase is recorded. I stayed within the household budget you're required to maintain according to Judge Morrison's order. If you have questions about specific items, I can explain the practical necessity of each one. Ethan opened the ledger and stared at the neat columns of numbers. She'd categorized everything: immediate repairs, long-term improvements, household efficiency upgrades. At the bottom, she'd calculated the potential savings over the next 6 months. You did this while shopping? I did this last night after reading your financial records. She started unloading bags. You keep them in your office. The door was open. That's private. Nothing in a marriage is private, Mr. Hale, especially not a marriage designed to prove to a judge that you're capable of responsible household management. Clara hefted a bag of lime over her shoulder, like she'd been doing ranch work her entire life. If you wanted privacy, you should have paid your taxes. She walked toward the chicken coop, and Ethan found himself following her, torn between anger and something dangerously close to admiration. No woman had ever talked to him like this. His mother had been soft-spoken and gentle until the fever took her. The few women he'd known in town treated him with either pity or cautious interest. Clara treated him like a business partner who needed significant improvement. My father built this ranch, he said, watching her work. Everything I've done has been to honor that. Your father made mistakes. Clara spread lime across the coop floor with efficient movements. According to your records, he overextended on cattle purchases 3 years running and never diversified income streams. That's why you nearly lost everything. He was trying to build something, and you've been trying to fix his mistakes ever since. She straightened up, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. I'm not criticizing him, Mr. Hale. I'm saying you don't have to keep punishing yourself for his choices. You can make different ones. Ethan felt something hot and uncomfortable lodge in his throat. You don't know anything about it. I know you work yourself half to death trying to prove something to a man who's been gone for 8 years. Her voice softened just slightly. I know you've convinced yourself that needing help is weakness, and I know that's why you're angry right now. Not because I'm fixing the chicken coop, but because you're realizing you actually need me. He should have walked away. Instead, he heard himself say, I need your legal status as my wife. That's different from needing you. Is it? Clara tilted her head, studying him with those unsettling eyes. Then why are you still standing here? Ethan turned and left before he could answer that question. Dinner was another battle he didn't know he was fighting until he'd already lost. Clara had transformed the kitchen into something that smelled like his mother's cooking, and when she set a plate in front of him, Ethan realized he'd been eating barely edible trail food for so long he'd forgotten what real meals tasted like. Where'd you learn to cook like this? I ran a boarding house in Philadelphia for 4 years. Clara sat across from him with her own plate. 20 rooms, 60 meals a day during peak season. I know how to feed people efficiently. Why'd you leave? The building was sold. The new owner wanted to convert it into offices. She cut her meat with precise movements. I could have found work as a housekeeper, but the pay would have been half what I was making, and I'd have no control over my own life. When the marriage broker showed me your proposal, I saw an opportunity. To come west and fix a stranger's chicken coop? To build something that belongs to me. She met his eyes across the table. You needed a wife for the judge. I needed a partnership where my work is valued and my future is secure. We both get what we want. And what happens when you decide ranch life isn't what you bargained for? I don't make decisions lightly, Mr. Hale. When I commit to something, I see it through. Clara stood and began clearing dishes. Now, we should discuss sleeping arrangements. I assume you want me in the spare room? That was the agreement. Fine. I'll need to air it out tomorrow and make some basic repairs. The window doesn't seal properly, and there's a water stain on the ceiling that suggests a roof leak. I'll fix the roof. When? She turned to face him, one hand on her hip. You're already working sunrise to sundown. Add my repairs to your list, and you'll be working until midnight. Or you could let me hire someone from town to handle the household repairs while you focus on the ranch. I'm not paying some stranger to work on my house. Then teach me to do it myself. Clara crossed her arms. You seem to think I'm just here to cook and keep house, but I'm capable of far more than that. I managed a boarding house, Mr. Hale. I can handle a hammer and a ledger book with equal skill. The question is whether you're too stubborn to let me. Ethan stood up, suddenly exhausted by this woman who seemed determined to dismantle every wall he'd built. Do what you want. Just stay out of my way. That's the problem. Clara's voice followed him as he headed for the door. I don't think you actually want me to stay out of your way. I think you're terrified that if I get too close, you might actually have to feel something again. He slammed the door behind him and walked out into the night, where the stars were bright and cold and didn't ask uncomfortable questions. But even out here, under the vast Arizona sky, Ethan couldn't escape the truth of what Clara had said. He'd built this ranch into a fortress, and now the enemy was inside the walls, reorganizing his kitchen and fixing his chicken coop, and looking at him like she could see straight through to the frightened boy who'd watched his father die. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of hammering. He pulled on his clothes and walked outside to find Clara on the roof, replacing shingles with steady, competent movements. What the hell are you doing up there? Fixing the leak. She didn't stop working. You said you'd do it. You didn't say when. I have a room that's getting rained on. You could fall. I'm perfectly safe. She secured another shingle and reached for the next one. I replaced an entire section of roof at the boarding house after a winter storm. This is nothing. Ethan climbed up beside her before he could think better of it. Give me the hammer. Why? Because if you fall and break your neck, Judge Morrison will think I killed you to get out of the marriage. Clara smiled, and Ethan felt that uncomfortable tightness in his chest again. How practical of you to care about my well-being. I didn't say I cared. I said I don't want to be blamed. Of course. She handed him a shingle. Well then, Mr. Hale, since you're so concerned about legal liability, you should know that section over there is completely rotted through. We'll need to replace at least 6 more boards before the next rain. They worked in silence for the next hour, and Ethan found himself watching her more than he should. Clara moved with efficiency and purpose. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She didn't complain about the heat or the difficulty. She just did the work, the same way she'd done everything since arriving, with a competence that made his own long-suffering isolation look like self-indulgent martyrdom. You never answered my question yesterday, he said finally. Why'd you really come west? I told you, partnership and security. That's the practical answer. What's the real one? Clara stopped working and looked at him. Really looked at him. and Ethan felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with being on a roof. I was 26 years old and invisible. Too old to be marriageable, too independent to be properly feminine. I could have spent the rest of my life working jobs that paid half what men earned, being grateful for scraps. Or I could come here and build something real, with a stranger who doesn't want you, with a partner who needs me. She picked up her hammer again. There's a difference, Mr. Hale. You'll figure it out, eventually. That night, Clara presented him with a revised financial plan for the ranch. She'd found inefficiencies in his supply purchases, identified 3 potential new income streams, and calculated a path to paying off his remaining debt 18 months faster than his current trajectory. Where did you learn this? I told you, I ran a boarding house. You don't survive in business without understanding numbers. She pointed to a column. You're also undercharging for your cattle. Market rates have gone up, but you're still using prices from 3 years ago. I charge fair prices. You charge what you think people can afford to pay. That's charity, not business. Clara closed the ledger. The ranchers who are succeeding right now are the ones willing to charge what their product is worth, unless you'd rather keep barely surviving out of some misguided sense of nobility. My father always said, your father drove this ranch into debt. Clara's voice was gentle but firm. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. He made emotional decisions instead of practical ones, and you've been trying to fix it ever since while making the same mistakes. I'm not here to honor your father's memory, Mr. Hale. I'm here to save what he left behind. Ethan stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. You've been here 3 days, and you think you know better than... I know you're heading for the same cliff he drove off. Clara stood too, meeting his anger with steady calm. I know you work 18-hour days and eat like a vagrant and never sleep more than 5 hours. I know you haven't had a decent conversation with another human being in months. And I know that if you keep going like this, Judge Morrison won't need to take your ranch. You'll destroy it yourself through sheer exhaustion. Get out! This is my house too now. She didn't move. You married me to keep your land. That means I have just as much stake in this ranch's survival as you do. So no, I won't get out. I won't stay quiet, and I won't watch you kill yourself over pride. They stood facing each other across the kitchen table, and Ethan felt something inside him that had been locked away for years start to crack. He'd spent so long being alone, being strong, being the man who didn't need anyone. And now this woman, this practical, infuriating, impossibly competent woman, was standing in his kitchen telling him he was wrong about everything. Why do you care? The words came out rougher than he intended. This is just a business arrangement. Is it? Clara's expression softened just slightly. Because from where I'm standing, Mr. Hale, this looks like 2 people who are terrified of needing each other, building walls out of stubbornness and pride. And if we don't figure out how to work together, really work together, we're both going to lose everything we came here to protect. Ethan wanted to argue. Instead, he picked up the ledger and carried it to his office without another word. But late that night, when he should have been sleeping, he found himself reading through Clara's financial analysis again and realizing she was right about every single point. The woman he'd married to save his ranch was going to save it whether he liked it or not. And that terrified him more than losing the land ever had. By dawn, Ethan had made a decision that felt like surrender. He found Clara in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast, and dropped the ledger on the table between them. The supply orders. You handle them from now on. Clara looked up from the stove, her expression unreadable. All of them? You found 12% waste in my purchasing. That's money we can't afford to lose. He poured himself coffee, avoiding her eyes. But I review everything before it goes out. Of course. She cracked eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. "I'll have the first order ready by noon." "And Clara?" He forced himself to look at her. "The financial plan. We'll try it your way for 6 months. If it works, we continue. If it doesn't, it will work." She didn't say it with arrogance, just certainty. "But you'll need to trust me to make decisions without second-guessing everything." "I'm not good at trust." "I noticed." She slid eggs onto his plate. "Lucky for you, I'm patient." The words hung between them like a promise neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Ethan ate quickly and headed out to the pastures. But all morning he kept thinking about the way Clara had said, patient, like she was planning to stay long enough to see him through whatever darkness he was carrying. 3 days later, he came back from checking fence lines to find Clara in his office, reorganizing 8 years of chaotic record-keeping into a system that actually made sense. She'd created categories, cross-referenced dates, and flagged inconsistencies he didn't even know existed. "Some of these receipts don't match your cattle counts," she said without preamble. "Either you've been losing stock without noticing, or someone's been taking them." Ethan felt ice slide down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "Here," she pointed to entries from the past 18 months. "You recorded purchasing 43 head, but your inventory counts only show 38. That's 5 missing cattle with no explanation." "Could be deaths, disease, accidents." "You keep death records." Clara pulled out another ledger. "Only 2 losses in that period, both documented. So where are the other 3? Ethan grabbed the papers and scanned them, his mind racing. He'd been so focused on keeping the ranch running day to day that he'd never stopped to audit the bigger picture. Son of a bitch. "Do you have enemies?" "Every rancher has competitors, but stealing cattle..." He threw the papers down. "That's a hanging offense. Nobody's that stupid." "Someone is." Clara stood and moved to the window, her profile sharp against the afternoon light. "And they've been doing it slowly enough that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. Which you weren't. Because I was too busy trying to survive." "Exactly." She turned back to him. "But now you have someone looking. So what do we do about it?" The "we" hit him harder than it should have. Ethan had been alone for so long that the idea of someone standing beside him, asking what "we" should do, felt foreign and dangerous and necessary all at once. "We check the herds tonight, all of them. If someone's stealing cattle, they're moving them after dark." "I'm coming with you." "Like hell you are." "I found the discrepancy. I'm seeing it through." Clara crossed her arms. "Unless you think I can't handle a night ride?" "I think if something happens, then you'll deal with it, just like you've been dealing with everything else." She grabbed her shawl from the chair. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs protecting, Mr. Hale. I'm your partner. Start treating me like one." They rode out just after sunset, when the sky was bleeding purple and orange across the horizon. Ethan led them to the north pasture first, where the majority of the herd grazed. Everything looked normal. Cattle settled for the night, no unusual movement, no signs of disturbance. "Maybe I was wrong," Clara said quietly. "Maybe it was just accounting errors." "You weren't wrong." Ethan dismounted and examined the fence line. "Look here. These posts have been loosened recently. Someone's been making it easier to move cattle through, without cutting wire." Clara climbed down beside him, and in the fading light, Ethan saw the fear flash across her face before she locked it away. "How many do you think they've taken?" "More than 3. That's just what you caught in the records." He remounted. "We need to check the west boundary. There's a ravine there that leads to open range. If I was stealing cattle, that's where I'd move them." They rode in tense silence, and Ethan found himself acutely aware of Clara beside him. The straight line of her back, the determined set of her jaw, the way she handled the horse like she'd been born to it. She'd told him she was capable, and every day she proved it in ways that made his careful isolation look pathetic. The West Ravine was dark when they reached it, but not empty. Ethan heard voices before he saw the firelight, and he grabbed Clara's reins, pulling both horses into the cover of rocks. "Stay here," he whispered. "Like hell." "Clara," he gripped her arm. "If this goes wrong, someone needs to ride back and get the sheriff. That's you." For a moment, he thought she'd argue. Then she nodded once, and Ethan moved forward alone, his hand on his revolver. 3 men were sitting around a small fire, and even in the darkness, Ethan recognized one of them, Jack Drummond, who worked for the neighboring cattle operation. The other 2 were strangers, but their brands marked them as hired guns, not ranchers. "Told you we need to move faster," Drummond was saying. "Hale's got a new wife now. She might actually get his records in order." "So we take more before she does," one of the strangers spat into the fire. "Hit him hard enough, and he'll be too busy trying to recover to notice we've been bleeding him for months." Ethan stepped into the firelight with his gun drawn. "Months, Jack? I thought we were friends." All 3 men scrambled up, but Ethan had the advantage of surprise and position. "Don't move, and don't try for your weapons unless you want to see how fast I can shoot." "Ethan," Drummond raised his hands, "this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you've been stealing my cattle and selling them for profit. Tell me I'm wrong." The silence was admission enough. One of the strangers made a move toward his gun, and Ethan fired, not to kill, but to warn. The bullet kicked up dirt at the man's feet, and everyone froze. "Next one goes center mass," Ethan said calmly. "Now, you're going to tell me exactly how much you've taken, who you're selling to, and why the hell you thought you could steal from me without consequences." "You were already dying," Drummond said, and his voice was bitter. "Your ranch has been circling the drain for years. We figured a few head here and there wouldn't matter. You figured wrong." Then Clara's voice cut through the darkness. "There are 6 more cattle in the ravine below, freshly branded, and 3 horses tied up near that boulder." Ethan's heart stopped. She was supposed to stay hidden. But Clara walked into the firelight with a rifle she'd taken from his saddle, and her aim was steady as stone. "I also found your ledger," she continued, kicking a small book toward Ethan's feet. "Every theft documented. Names, dates, buyers. You kept records of your own crime. How remarkably stupid." One of the strangers lunged at her, and Clara fired. The man went down, clutching his shoulder, screaming, and suddenly everything exploded into chaos. Drummond grabbed for his gun. The other stranger ran for the horses, and Ethan fired twice, once to stop Drummond, once to drop the runner before he could escape. When the dust settled, all 3 men were on the ground, wounded, furious, but alive. Clara stood with the rifle still raised, her face pale, but her hands steady. "You were supposed to stay back," Ethan said. "You were outnumbered." She lowered the weapon. "And they had evidence you needed. You could have been killed." "So could you." Clara stepped over one of the groaning men and picked up the ledger. "But we weren't. So now what?" Ethan stared at her, this woman who'd showed up 3 weeks ago to save his ranch and was now standing in the middle of a crime scene holding evidence like it was just another day's work. Something in his chest cracked open wider, and he had to look away before she could see it. "Now we tie them up and ride for the sheriff." It took 2 hours to secure the prisoners, and another 3 to make the ride into town. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, it was past midnight, and Clara's face was drawn with exhaustion. But she walked into that office with her head high, and laid out the evidence with the same precision she'd used to reorganize his financial records. Sheriff Bennett listened to everything, examined the ledger, and let out a low whistle. "This is bigger than cattle theft, Hale. These records show connections to buyers in 3 territories. This is organized crime." "I don't care what it is," Ethan said. "I want them prosecuted." "Oh, they will be. Bennett closed the ledger. But you should know. Drummond's going to claim he was working under orders from the Morrison Cattle Company. That's going to make some powerful enemies. Ethan felt Clara stiffen beside him. Morrison, the same judge who'd forced him to marry. The same man who owned half the territory's cattle operations.
"Let me guess," Clara said quietly.
Judge Morrison was planning to buy Ethan's ranch after it failed? Bennett's expression confirmed it. He's been buying up struggling operations for years. Your place was next on his list. Son of a bitch! Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He manufactures the crisis, then swoops in to save the day? That's business in the Arizona territory, Bennett stood. But with this evidence, you've got a fighting chance. Morrison's smart. He'll distance himself from Drummond fast. And without direct proof he ordered the thefts, we can't touch him. But we can destroy his operation. Clara's voice was cold. Every buyer listed in that ledger is accepting stolen goods. If we share this information with other ranchers, Morrison's entire network collapses. Both men stared at her. Bennett spoke first. That's a dangerous game, Mrs. Hale. So is stealing cattle. She met his eyes. Morrison forced my husband into an impossible position, then tried to steal his livelihood piece by piece. If you think I'm going to let that stand without consequences, you don't know me at all. The ride back to the ranch was silent until they were almost home. Then Clara said, "We need to move fast. Morrison will hear about the arrest by morning, and he'll try to cover his tracks." "We need to sleep," Ethan countered. "You've been up for 20 hours. I've been up for longer, running the boarding house during busy season." But her voice was strained. "Although I admit, we didn't usually have shootouts with cattle thieves." "Clara," he pulled his horse alongside hers. "What you did tonight, coming into that camp, finding the evidence, staying calm, that was either very brave or very stupid." "Which do you think it was?" "Both." He looked at her in the moonlight, this infuriating woman who kept saving him in ways he'd never asked for. "You could have died." "So could you, and then where would I be?" She tried for lightness, but Ethan heard the tremor underneath. "Stuck on a ranch I can't legally own? Fighting Judge Morrison alone? Much better to keep you alive." "That's the only reason?" Clara didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was softer. "Ask me that question in 6 months, Mr. Hale, when you've learned to trust me with more than just your supply orders." They reached the ranch house, and Ethan helped Clara dismount. For a moment, his hand stayed on her waist, and he felt her breath catch. This close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the dirt on her face from riding, the small tremor in her shoulders that she'd been hiding. "Go inside," he said roughly. "Get some sleep." "What about you?" "I need to check the herd. Make sure no one else has been—" "Ethan." She used his first name, and it hit him like a physical blow. "The herd is fine. You need rest as much as I do." "I don't." "Yes, you do." Clara stepped back, breaking the contact between them. "You can't protect this ranch if you collapse from exhaustion. And before you argue, remember that I now have a legal stake in keeping you healthy. So go to bed. That's not a suggestion." He wanted to argue. Instead, he found himself following her into the house, watching her light the lamps and move through the rooms like she belonged there. Because she did belong there. She'd earned it. Not through a marriage certificate, but through every action she'd taken since arriving. "Clara?" She turned at her bedroom door. "Thank you. For tonight." "We're partners, remember?" She smiled, tired but genuine. "That means I watch your back, even when you're too stubborn to realize you need it." She disappeared into her room, and Ethan stood in the hallway feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. 3 weeks ago, he'd married a stranger to save his ranch. Tonight, that stranger had stood beside him in the darkness, fired a rifle to protect him, and dismantled a criminal conspiracy with the same efficiency she used to reorganize his kitchen. And somewhere in the chaos of cattle thieves and midnight rides, Ethan had stopped seeing Clara Whitfield as an obligation and started seeing her as something far more dangerous, someone he was beginning to need. He walked to his own room and lay in the darkness, listening to the old house settle around him. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan Hale didn't feel alone. And that terrified him more than any threat Morrison could conjure. Because now, he had something to lose that was infinitely more valuable than land. The knock came at dawn, hard enough to rattle the door in its frame. Ethan was already awake, had been for an hour, lying in bed trying to convince himself that what he'd felt last night was exhaustion, not something far more dangerous. Clara's door opened at the same moment his did, and they met in the hallway, her hair loose around her shoulders, his shirt half-buttoned. "Stay inside," he said. "Not a chance." They reached the door together. Sheriff Bennett stood on the porch, his face grim in the early light. "We've got a problem." "Morrison?" "Drummond's dead. Hung himself in his cell 2 hours ago." Bennett pushed past them into the house. "At least, that's what it's supposed to look like." Clara's voice was steady. "But you don't believe it." Drummond was a coward. He was already talking about cutting a deal, naming names in exchange for a lighter sentence. Bennett pulled out a piece of paper. This was in his pocket, written in his hand, but the words, "These aren't something a man writes before he kills himself." Ethan read it aloud. "I acted alone. No one ordered me to steal. This is my burden to carry." He looked up. "Morrison." "Can't prove it, but yes." Bennett sank into a chair. "And now your best evidence just disappeared. The ledger's still solid, but without Drummond to testify about who gave the orders, Morrison walks away clean." "Like hell he does." Clara moved to the window, her shoulders rigid. "The ledger lists every buyer, every transaction. We expose those, Morrison's operation crumbles even without a direct connection." "You'll make enemies of half the territory's wealthy men," Bennett warned. "These aren't small-time rustlers. These are people with power, with money to hire the kind of problems that don't go away easily." "So we do nothing?" Ethan felt rage building in his chest. "We let Morrison murder a man in custody and walk free?" "I'm saying be smart about this." Bennett stood. "Morrison's already spreading word that you're a disgruntled rancher making wild accusations because your own mismanagement nearly cost you the ranch. He's got Judge Morrison backing his version." "Wait!" Clara turned sharply. "Judge Morrison and the cattle baron Morrison? They're related?" "Brothers." Bennett's expression was apologetic. "I thought you knew. The judge forced you into marriage knowing you'd fail eventually, and his brother's company would pick up the pieces." Ethan felt the room tilt. Every decision the judge had made, every impossible requirement, had been designed to set him up for failure. And he'd walked right into it, dragging Clara down with him. "Get out," he said quietly. "Ethan, I said get out!" His voice cracked. "I need to think." Bennett left, and Ethan stood in the middle of his kitchen, feeling the walls close in. 8 years of work, of sacrifice, of trying to honor his father's memory. And it had all been a setup from the start. He was fighting men with enough power to murder witnesses and corrupt judges, and all he had was a failing ranch and a wife he'd married under false pretenses. "Stop it," Clara's voice cut through his spiral. "I can hear you thinking, and whatever you're telling yourself right now is probably wrong. They killed a man to protect their operation. What do you think they'll do to us?" "Fight back until we can't." She moved closer, and Ethan couldn't bring himself to look at her. "Or we could run. Give them the ranch, disappear somewhere they can't find us." "You'd do that?" "I'd do a lot of things to stay alive." Clara's hand touched his arm, and Ethan flinched. but I'd prefer to win. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and start thinking like a fighter." "I don't know how to fight this." "Yes, you do." Her fingers tightened. "You've been fighting your entire life, against poverty, against loss, against every circumstance that tried to break you. This is just another fight, and this time, you're not alone." Ethan finally looked at her, and the absolute certainty in her eyes nearly undid him. "Clara, if we do this, if we go after Morrison, they'll come after you too." "Good. I've been itching for a real challenge since I got here." She smiled, and it was fierce. "Your chicken coop was getting boring." Despite everything, Ethan felt something like a laugh try to escape. "You're insane." "I'm practical. There's a difference." She released his arm and moved to the table. "Now sit down. We're going to plan this properly." For the next 2 hours, they worked through strategy. Clara suggested taking the ledger directly to ranchers who'd been buying Morrison's stolen cattle. Turn them against him by threatening exposure unless they testified. Ethan countered that those men would more likely kill them than cooperate. They compromised on a plan to approach the territorial marshal in Tucson, bypassing local corruption entirely. "It's a 3-day ride," Ethan said, "and we'd be leaving the ranch unprotected. So we hire someone to watch it. That boy who works at the feed store. Danny something. He's looking for work, and he's too young to be tangled up in Morrison's network." "You've been paying attention." "I pay attention to everything, Mr. Hale. You should know that by now." Clara closed the ledger. "We leave tomorrow at dawn. That gives us today to secure the ranch and prepare for whatever comes next." They spent the morning fortifying, checking weapons, inventorying supplies, making sure every door and window had secure locks. Clara worked beside him with grim efficiency, and Ethan found himself watching her more than the work. The way she loaded the rifle with practiced ease, the way she moved through the house like she was already planning defensive positions, the way she met every challenge with that infuriating calm. "Where did you learn to shoot?" he asked, finally. "My father owned a gunsmith shop in Philadelphia. I grew up around firearms." She checked the rifle's sight. "He taught me that a woman who can protect herself doesn't need to wait for rescue." Smart man. He was, until he drank himself to death after my mother left. Clara's voice didn't waver. "That's when I learned that loving someone doesn't make them stay, and needing someone doesn't make them worthy of that need. So I stopped doing both." Ethan felt those words hit somewhere deep. "Is that why you agreed to this marriage? Because you knew you wouldn't have to need me?" "I agreed because it was practical." She set down the rifle and faced him. "But somewhere between fixing your stove and chasing cattle thieves, practical became complicated. So now I'm trying to figure out if needing someone is still weakness, or if maybe I had it wrong all along." "Clara," the sound of horses cut him off. Multiple riders, coming fast. Ethan grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, Clara right behind him with her own weapon. 4 men on horseback, and even at a distance, Ethan recognized the lead rider, Thomas Morrison himself. "Stay behind me," Ethan said. "We're past that." Clara checked her ammunition. "Whatever happens, we face it together." They walked out onto the porch as Morrison and his men rode into the yard. The cattle baron was 50-something, well-dressed, with a kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale," Morrison tipped his hat. "I heard you had some trouble with a former employee of mine. I came to express my condolences and see if there's anything I can do to help." "You can start by admitting you ordered him to steal my cattle," Ethan said. "That's a serious accusation." Morrison's smile never wavered. "Based on what? The ravings of a thief who couldn't live with his own guilt?" "Based on a ledger that documents 18 months of organized theft and lists every buyer in your network." Clara's voice was ice. "Would you like me to read the entries? I have them memorized." Something flickered in Morrison's eyes.
"I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding."
"There's no misunderstanding." Ethan stepped forward. "You've been bleeding my ranch dry while your brother blocked every attempt I made to get fair treatment from the court. You wanted me to fail, so you could buy this land for pennies on the dollar." "That's quite a conspiracy theory." Morrison's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. "Do you have any proof of these allegations?" "The ledger's in the territorial marshal's hands as of this morning," Clara lied smoothly, "along with witness statements from 3 other ranchers you've been stealing from. Even if something happens to us, the evidence survives." Ethan shot her a look. They hadn't sent anything yet. But Clara's expression dared him to contradict her. Morrison studied them both, and Ethan saw the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. "You're making a mistake," Morrison said finally. "I came here to make you a fair offer. Sell me the ranch for market value. Walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, and we all forget this unpleasantness ever happened." "No." "Think carefully, Mr. Hale. You're a small rancher with a struggling operation and powerful enemies. Your wife is a stranger who's been here, a month? She doesn't know what she's dragging you into." "She knows exactly what she's doing," Ethan said. "And the answer is still no." Morrison's smile disappeared. "Then you're a fool, and fools don't last long in the Arizona Territory." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Clara waited until they were out of sight before lowering her weapon. "That was a dangerous bluff," Ethan said. "It bought us time," she turned to him. "Now we actually do need to get that ledger to the marshal before Morrison figures out we haven't sent it yet." "We leave tonight, not tomorrow."
Agreed. They went inside to pack, and Ethan found himself moving through his house with new awareness. If this went wrong, if Morrison made good on his implicit threat, he'd never see this place again. 8 years of his life, his father's legacy, everything he'd built, it could all end in the next 72 hours. "Ethan?" Clara was standing in the doorway of his room, watching him pack. "Whatever happens, I want you to know something." "Don't." He couldn't look at her. "Don't say goodbye like we're not coming back." "I'm not saying goodbye." She stepped inside, closing the distance between them. "I'm saying that when I came here, I thought I understood what I was getting into. A practical arrangement, a business partnership. But you were right that first night. I'm not staying out of your way. I can't. Because somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, I started caring about what happens to you. And that terrifies me almost as much as Morrison does." Ethan finally looked at her, and the raw honesty in her face broke something open inside him. "Clara, I can't. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just telling you the truth." She reached out and touched his face, and Ethan felt himself lean into her palm despite every wall he'd built. "Because if we don't make it through this, I want you to know that being here, fighting beside you, saving this ranch with you, it's been the most real thing I've ever done." "Stop talking like we're going to die." "Then promise me we won't." "I can't promise that." "Then promise me that if it comes down to a choice, the ranch or our lives, you'll choose us." Her hand was still on his face, and Ethan could feel himself drowning in the impossibility of what she was asking. "Promise me you won't throw your life away for land." "This ranch is everything." "No, it's not." Clara's voice broke, just slightly. "It's wood and dirt and ghosts. I'm real. What's growing between us is real. And if you can't see that, then maybe I did make a mistake coming here." She started to pull away, and Ethan caught her wrist without thinking. "Wait." "Why?" "Because you're right." The words came out rough, like they'd been scraped from somewhere deep inside him. "About all of it. I've been so focused on saving this place,
that I forgot why I was saving it. And now you're here, and everything's different. And I don't know how to want something that isn't about fixing my father's mistakes. Learn. Clara moved closer, and Ethan could smell the soap she used, could see the gold flecks in her eyes. We have 3 days of riding ahead of us. That's 3 days to figure out how to want something for yourself, instead of for everyone who came before. And if I can't, then I'll teach you. She smiled, and it was tender and fierce all at once. I'm very good at teaching stubborn men impossible things. You should know that by now.
Ethan pulled her closer before he could stop himself, and Clara came willingly, settling against his chest like she belonged there. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing, just holding on, and Ethan felt the last of his carefully constructed walls start to crumble. I'm not good at this, he said into her hair. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to try. What if I hurt you? What if you don't? Clara pulled back just enough to look at him. What if we get through this, and the ranch survives, and we actually build something worth having? What if the worst thing that happens is that you let yourself be happy? Ethan wanted to argue. Instead, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was desperate and clumsy, and tasted like fear and hope and 8 years of being alone. Clara made a small sound and kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt. And for the first time since his father died, Ethan felt something inside him that wasn't about duty or responsibility or trying to fix the unfixable. He felt alive. They broke apart, breathing hard, and Clara's eyes were bright with emotion. Well, that was unexpected. Was it? No, she laughed, shaky. I've been wanting you to do that since you showed up on the roof to help me fix the leak. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm aware. She smoothed his collar, a gesture so intimate it made Ethan's chest ache. But I'm patient, remember? Clara, he caught her hands. After we deal with Morrison, after this is over, I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except honest. She squeezed his fingers. We figure out the rest together. That's what partners do. They finished packing in silence, but it was different now, charged with possibility instead of just fear. When young Danny arrived to watch the ranch, Ethan found himself giving instructions while Clara stood beside him, her presence solid and real, and his in ways that had nothing to do with marriage certificates. They rode out as the sun was setting, pushing hard to put distance between themselves and Morrison's reach. Ethan kept expecting Clara to slow them down, to need rest or complain about the pace. But she matched him mile for mile, her face set with determination. And Ethan realized he'd been underestimating her from the moment she arrived. This woman, who'd reorganized his kitchen and fixed his chicken coop, and stood beside him against cattle thieves and corrupt judges. She wasn't just saving his ranch. She was saving him from the prison he'd built out of grief and duty and fear. And somewhere on that dark road to Tucson, with Clara riding beside him and the stars bright overhead, Ethan Hale finally understood what he'd been running from all these years. Not love, not vulnerability, not the risk of needing someone. He'd been running from the possibility that he might actually deserve to be happy. And now, with everything on the line and danger closing in from all sides, he was finally ready to stop running and start fighting for something that mattered more than land or legacy or his father's unfulfilled dreams. He was ready to fight for the woman who'd walked into his life and refused to stay out of his way. They'd been riding for 6 hours when Ethan heard it, the distant sound of horses behind them, too steady to be coincidence. He slowed his mount, and Clara pulled alongside immediately, her hand already moving to her rifle. How many? She asked. At least 3.
Maybe more. Ethan scanned the darkness.
They're keeping their distance, but they're tracking us. Morrison's men? Who else? He calculated distances, terrain, options. We're still 2 days from Tucson, and this road's too open for an ambush. If they wanted us dead, they'd have made their move already.
So they're hurting us somewhere. Clara's voice was calm, but Ethan heard the tension underneath. Pushing us toward a place where they have the advantage. We could double back, lose them in the hills, and waste another day while Morrison covers his tracks in Tucson? She shook her head. No, we keep moving forward, but we stay alert. Clara, if they catch us, then we fight. She met his eyes. Together, like we agreed. They pushed on, and Ethan found himself hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. The kiss they'd shared before leaving felt like it had happened in another lifetime, when the world was simpler and danger was still theoretical.
Now it was real and closing in, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what would happen to Clara if Morrison's men caught them on this empty road.
"Stop it," Clara said quietly. "Stop what?" "Planning my funeral." She adjusted her reins. "I can practically hear you catastrophizing from here." "I'm being realistic." "You're being scared. There's a difference." She glanced at him. "I'm scared too, but fear is only useful if it makes us sharper, not if it makes us stupid." "When did you get so wise about fear?" "When I spent 4 years running a boarding house full of desperate people who'd lost everything." Her voice softened. "I learned that everyone's afraid of something, Ethan. The difference is whether you let that fear control you or whether you control it." "And which one are you doing right now?" "Both. I'm terrified that we won't make it to Tucson, that Morrison will win, that everything we've built will disappear." She paused. "But I'm more terrified of not trying."
"So I'm riding forward even though my hands are shaking." Ethan looked at her hands on the reins. They were steady as stone. "You're not shaking." "Not where you can see." Clara smiled, and it was fierce. "That's the trick, Mr. Hale. You fake it until it becomes real." They rode until dawn broke over the hills, and Ethan finally called a halt near a creek where they could water the horses and rest for an hour. Clara dismounted stiffly, and Ethan saw her wince as she stretched. "You should have said something. We could have stopped sooner." "I've handled worse." But she moved carefully as she led her horse to water. "The boarding house had 60 stairs between floors. I used to climb them 30 times a day. This is nothing." "Clara," he caught her arm, "you don't have to prove anything to me." "Don't I?" She turned to face him. "You married me thinking I was some soft city woman who'd need constant protection. Every day since then, I've had to show you I'm more than that. So forgive me if I'm not eager to admit weakness now. I don't think you're weak. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." The words came out rougher than he intended, and that scares the hell out of me. "Why?" "Because strong people don't need anyone, and I'm realizing I need you more than I've needed anything in 10 years. Clara stared at him, and Ethan saw emotions flicker across her face too fast to name. "That's the first truly honest thing you've said to me since we met." "I'm not good at honest." "Then practice." She stepped closer. "Because if we're going to survive what's coming, I need to know what you're thinking. All of it. Not just the parts you think I can handle." Ethan took a breath. "I'm thinking that Morrison's men are less than an hour behind us. I'm thinking we're not going to make it to Tucson before they catch up. And I'm thinking that when they do, I'm going to have to make a choice between fighting them off and getting you to safety. And I don't know which one to choose." "You choose both." Clara's voice was steel. "We fight together and we survive together. Those are the only options." "What if I can't protect you?" "Then I'll protect myself." She pulled out her revolver and checked the chambers with practiced ease. "And probably you while I'm at it. You're decent in a fight, Mr. Hale, but I'm better with a gun than you think." Your father the gunsmith? Taught me to shoot before I could read. She holstered the weapon. Said the world was dangerous for women who couldn't defend themselves. Turns out he was right. They rested another 30 minutes, and then they were back on the road, pushing hard toward the next town. By mid-morning, Ethan spotted riders ahead of them, too, and his stomach dropped. "They've boxed us in," he said. Clara saw them immediately. "How many?" "4 in front, at least 3 behind. We're caught between them. So we go through." She urged her horse faster. "The ones ahead don't know we've spotted them yet. If we charge now, we might break through before they can organize." "That's insane. You have a better plan?" She was already pulling ahead. "Because I'm open to suggestions that don't involve dying on this road." Ethan swore and kicked his horse forward, catching up to Clara as she thundered toward the riders ahead. They had maybe 30 seconds before those men realized they weren't slowing down. 30 seconds to close the distance and turn surprise into an advantage. 20 seconds. The riders ahead were spreading out, forming a line across the road. 10 seconds. Clara pulled her rifle from its saddle holster without slowing. 5 seconds. Ethan drew his revolver. Then they were in the middle of it. Horses screaming, men shouting, gunfire cracking through the air. Ethan fired twice, saw one man go down, then his horse collided with another mount, and suddenly he was fighting to stay in the saddle. Clara's rifle fired again and again, each shot precise, and through the chaos, Ethan saw 2 more men fall. "Ride!" Clara screamed, and they broke through the line, galloping hard, with shouts and more gunfire chasing them. A bullet whined past Ethan's head. Another kicked up dirt beside Clara's horse. They rode like hell itself was behind them, and maybe it was, because when Ethan risked a glance back, he saw the remaining riders regrouping and giving chase. "They're coming!" he shouted. "I know!" Clara leaned low over her horse's neck. "There's a town ahead, Copper Springs. If we can make it there—" Her horse stumbled. For one heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought it would go down and take Clara with it. But she somehow kept her seat, kept the animal moving, even as it limped and struggled. "Clara! Keep going!" Her voice was strained. "I'm fine!" She wasn't fine. Her horse was injured, slowing, and the riders behind were gaining fast. Ethan made a split-second decision and wheeled his mount around. "What are you doing?" Clara screamed. "Buying you time," he raised his gun. "When I start shooting, you ride for Copper Springs. Don't stop, don't look back. Find the marshal, give him the ledger." "I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice." Ethan fired at the approaching riders, and they scattered, taking cover. "Go, Clara, now!" "Damn you, Ethan Hale. Go!" She went, her injured horse struggling, but moving, and Ethan turned his attention to the men closing in. 5 of them now. The ones from ahead and behind had joined up. 5 against 1, and Ethan was down to 4 bullets. He'd done worse odds before, but never with so much at stake. "Hale!" one of the riders called out. "Give us the ledger and the woman, and you can walk away." "Go to hell." "Have it your way." They charged, and Ethan fired his remaining shots. 2 hit, 3 missed. Then they were on him, dragging him from his horse, and Ethan fought like a cornered animal. He got his hands on one man's throat, took a fist to his ribs that cracked something, drove his elbow into another man's face hard enough to break bone. But there were too many. They wrestled him down, and someone pressed a gun to his head. "Should have taken the deal," the man said. Then a rifle shot cracked out, and the man dropped. Another shot, another body. The remaining men spun around, and Ethan saw Clara sitting on her limping horse at the edge of the road, her rifle smoking. "Let him go," she said calmly, "or the next shot goes through someone's skull instead of their leg." "You don't have enough bullets."
Clara fired again, and the man who'd spoken went down, clutching his shoulder. "Want a bet?" The last two riders scrambled for their horses and fled. Clara waited until they were gone before lowering the rifle, and Ethan saw her hands shaking now. Really shaking.
"I thought I told you to ride for town," he said, climbing to his feet. "You did." Clara dismounted carefully. "I ignored you. Seems to be a pattern with us."
"You came back."
"Of course I came back." She moved toward him, and Ethan saw tears tracking through the dust on her face. "Did you really think I'd leave you to die alone?"
"I thought I'd bought you enough time to escape."
"I don't want to escape." Her voice broke. "I want to survive this with you. Or not at all. When are you going to understand that?"
Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Clara came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. They stood like that while the morning sun climbed higher, and the bodies of Morrison's men lay scattered around them. And Ethan felt something fundamental shift inside him. He'd spent his whole life fighting alone, believing that was strength. But this woman, this impossible, infuriating woman, had just risked everything to save him. And he finally understood what Clara had been trying to tell him from the beginning. Strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about knowing when to let someone stand beside you. "We need to move," Clara said finally. "More of them could be coming. Your horse can make it to town if we go slow." She pulled back and looked at him. "Are you hurt?" "Couple cracked ribs, maybe. Nothing that won't heal." Ethan touched her face, wiping away tears and dust. "Clara, what you just did was practical. You're no good to me dead." But her smile was tender. "Also, I might be slightly in love with you, and the idea of watching you die was unacceptable." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Clara, don't." She put her hand over his mouth. "Don't say it back if you're not sure. Don't say it because you think you should. Just let me have said it. We'll deal with what it means later."
"What if there isn't a later?"
"Then at least you know." She dropped her hand. "Now come on, we've got a marshal to find and a criminal empire to dismantle." They rode into Copper Springs an hour later, leading the injured horse and looking like survivors of a small war. The town marshal took one look at them and ushered them into his office, where Ethan laid out the whole story. The cattle theft, Morrison's involvement, Drummond's murder, the ledger, and the armed men who'd just tried to kill them on the road. Marshal Hayes listened to everything, examined the ledger, and then sat back with a heavy sigh. "You've stepped into something bigger than you realize." "What do you mean?" "Thomas Morrison doesn't just run cattle operations. He's connected to every major crime syndicate in 3 territories. Hayes pulled out a file. "We've been building a case against him for 2 years, but every witness disappears or recants. Every piece of evidence vanishes. He's got judges, sheriffs, even territorial officials in his pocket." "What about the marshal in Tucson?" Clara asked. "Dead. 3 weeks ago. Riding accident, supposedly." Hayes met their eyes. "I'm the only territorial law enforcement in 100 miles who isn't on Morrison's payroll. And even I can't move against him without proof that'll hold up in federal court." Ethan felt hope draining away. "So this ledger is valuable, but not enough on its own." Hayes leaned forward. "What I need is someone on the inside. Someone who can testify about Morrison's operation with first-hand knowledge. Someone he trusted." "Drummond's dead," Clara said flatly. "I know, but there's someone else." Hayes pulled out a photograph. "Morrison's accountant. Man named Peter Lansing. He keeps Morrison's books, knows where every illegal dollar flows. If we can get him to turn." "Where is he?" "Tucson. Lives in a house Morrison owns. Works in an office Morrison controls." Hayes put the photo away. "Getting to him will be next to impossible. Morrison will have guards." "I'll do it," Clara said. Both men stared at her. Ethan spoke first. Absolutely not. Why not? I'm the one with bookkeeping experience. I'm the one who can talk to an accountant in his own language. She stood up. And I'm the one Morrison won't see coming. Clara, it's too dangerous. Everything we've done since leaving the ranch has been dangerous. She turned to Hayes. This accountant, does he have family? Wife and 2 children. Morrison threatened them to keep Lansing in line. Then we offer protection. His family gets safe passage out of the territory in exchange for his testimony. Clara's mind was clearly racing. We approach him at his home, late at night, when Morrison's guards are spread thin. We give him a choice. Help us destroy Morrison, or spend the rest of his life watching his children grow up under a criminal's thumb. Hayes looked at Ethan. Your wife's got steel in her spine. I'm aware. Ethan stood too. But she's not doing this alone. You can't come with me, Clara said. Morrison's men know your face. They see you in Tucson, they'll sound the alarm. But me? She smiled grimly. I'm just some rancher's wife, barely worth noticing. I can move through that town without raising suspicion. And if something goes wrong? Then you come get me. She touched his arm. But it won't go wrong. Trust me. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to lock her somewhere safe and handle this himself. But he looked at Clara's face, determined, unafraid, absolutely certain, and realized he had to let her do this. Not because it was safe, but because she was right. She was the only one who could pull this off. 3 conditions, he said. 1. Hayes assigns you backup, someone who knows Tucson and can get you out if things go south. 2. You take my gun in addition to yours. And 3, his voice roughed. You come back to me. No matter what happens, you find a way back.
Deal. Clara kissed him quickly. And Ethan, when I do come back, we're going to have a long conversation about what happens next. After Morrison's finished, after the ranch is safe, we're going to talk about what we actually are to each other.
I already know what we are.
Do you?
Partners. He pulled her close. Equals. Whatever happens in Tucson, whatever comes after, we face it together.
Together, Clara agreed. No more fighting alone.
They spent the rest of the day planning. Hayes assigned one of his deputies, a woman named Sarah Martinez, who'd grown up in Tucson and knew every back alley and safe house. The plan was simple. Enter Tucson after dark, approach Lansing's house through the garden, present their offer, and get out before dawn. Simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying. That night, Ethan walked Clara to the stable where Sarah was preparing horses. He couldn't find words for what he needed to say. Couldn't articulate the fear and pride and desperate hope churning in his chest. Clara seemed to understand. I'll see you tomorrow, she said simply. You better. I always keep my promises, Mr. Hale, even the unspoken ones. She mounted her horse. And I promise you this, when I come back, we're done running. We're done hiding. We're going to build the life we both deserve. Then she was gone, riding into the darkness with Sarah. And Ethan stood in that stable feeling like his heart was leaving with her. Marshal Hayes found him there an hour later. She'll be fine, Hayes said. Sarah's good at this. How can you be sure? I can't. Hayes handed him a whiskey bottle. But I've learned something in 30 years of law enforcement. The people who care the most fight the hardest. And that woman cares about you more than anything. She'll move heaven and earth to make it back. Ethan took a long drink. I told her I needed her. First time I've said that to anyone since my father died. And what'd she say? She said it was about damn time I figured it out. Ethan smiled despite the fear. Then she rode off to face a criminal empire alone. Not alone, with Sarah. And with you waiting here, giving her a reason to come back. Hayes clapped his shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow, one way or another, we end this." But Ethan didn't rest. He stood outside all night, watching the road that led to Tucson, and praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, that Clara Whitfield would keep her promise and come back to him. Because somewhere in the past month, that practical arrangement had become the only thing in his life that actually mattered. Dawn broke without Clara, and Ethan felt panic claw at his throat. Marshal Hayes found him pacing outside the stable, his knuckles white around the reins of a saddled horse. "Give her until noon," Hayes said. "Sarah knows what she's doing."
"It's been 12 hours, which is how long these things take." Hayes blocked his path. "You ride to Tucson now, you'll blow their cover and get all three of them killed." Ethan wanted to push past him, to ride hard and damn the consequences. But Hayes was right, and charging in blind would only make things worse. So he waited, each minute stretching into eternity, until finally, he heard hoofbeats on the road. Clara rode in first, her face exhausted but triumphant. Behind her came Sarah, and between them rode a thin man in spectacles, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Ethan was off his horse and pulling Clara down before she'd fully stopped. "You're late," he said roughly. "We had complications." But she was smiling, really smiling. "Ethan, this is Peter Lansing. He's going to testify." Lansing dismounted shakily. "My family. They promised my family would be safe." "Already on a train to California," Sarah said. "New names, new lives. Morrison will never find them." "Then I'll tell you everything." Lansing's voice strengthened. "Every illegal transaction, every bribed official, every piece of evidence Morrison thought he'd destroyed. I kept copies of all of it." Hayes ushered them inside, and for the next 3 hours, Lansing talked while Hayes wrote everything down. The scope of Morrison's crimes was staggering. Not just cattle theft, but land fraud, witness intimidation, murder for hire, corruption at every level of territorial government. By the time Lansing finished, they had enough evidence to bring down not just Morrison, but a dozen other criminals operating across 3 territories. "This goes to federal court," Hayes said. "Morrison's connections won't reach that far." "How long until we can arrest him?" Ethan asked. "I'll wire the federal marshal in Santa Fe today. With this testimony, they'll issue warrants within 48 hours. Hayes looked at Lansing. "You'll need to stay in protective custody until trial. That could be months." "I'll do whatever it takes." Lansing removed his spectacles and cleaned them with shaking hands. "I've been Morrison's prisoner for 5 years. Months in custody is nothing compared to a lifetime looking over my shoulder." Clara touched Ethan's arm. "We should go home." "Not yet." Hayes pulled out another document. "There's something else you need to know. While you were gone, I did some digging into Judge Morrison's records. Turns out he's been using his position to force marriages across the territory. Always to men with valuable land, always with impossible requirements." "How many?" Clara asked. "At least 15 in the past 3 years. Some of the men met the requirements and kept their land. Most didn't." Hayes slid the paper across. "The ones who failed? Their ranches were purchased by Thomas Morrison within 6 months, always for a fraction of their value." Ethan felt sick. "So everyone who's been in my position was being set up from the start. The judge created the crisis. His brother profited from it." Hayes leaned forward. "But here's the thing. Those marriages were legal. Even though they were coerced, the certificates are valid, which means we're actually married," Clara finished. "Not just on paper, for real." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan looked at Clara and saw his own shock reflected back. They'd entered into this arrangement believing it was temporary, a legal fiction to be dissolved once the immediate crisis passed. But if the marriage was genuine, if there was no easy way out,
I need air, Clara said, and walked outside before Ethan could respond. He found her by the horses, her arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. Clara, don't. She held up a hand. Just give me a minute to think. About what? About the fact that I agreed to a business arrangement and ended up in a real marriage. She turned to face him. About the fact that even if Morrison goes to prison, even if we save the ranch, we're still legally bound to each other. And I need to figure out if that's what I actually want, or if I just convinced myself I want it because leaving wasn't an option. The words hit Ethan like a punch. You want to leave? I don't know, Clara's voice cracked. A month ago, I was running a boarding house in Philadelphia. Now I'm married to a man I barely know, fighting criminals, shooting people on dusty roads. And yes, somewhere in all that chaos, I fell in love with you. But that doesn't mean this is the life I actually want. Then what do you want? I want to know that you love me because you love me, not because you're legally obligated to. She was crying now, angry tears that she swiped away. I want to know that if we weren't married, if you had a choice, you'd still choose me. Ethan grabbed her shoulders. I would choose you every damn time. You don't know that. I know that you walked into my life and turned everything upside down. I know that you saved my ranch, my sanity, and probably my soul. I know that when you rode to Tucson last night, I stood outside for 12 hours praying to a God I don't believe in that you'd come back. His voice roughened. And I know that legal papers or not, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So yes, Clara, I'm choosing you. Not because of marriage certificates or land or any other practical reason. Because you're the only thing that's ever made sense in my entire broken life. She stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Say it. Say the actual words. I love you. Ethan pulled her close. I love your competence and your stubbornness and the way you reorganize things without asking permission. I love that you fixed my chicken coop and balanced my books and shot 3 men to save my life. I love everything about you, even the parts that drive me crazy. Clara laughed through her tears. That's the worst love confession I've ever heard. It's the only one I've got. He wiped her face gently. I'm not good at this, Clara. I'm not going to be the husband who writes poetry or remembers anniversaries. But I'm going to show up every day and work beside you and love you the best way I know how. And if that's not enough, it's enough. She kissed him, hard and desperate. It's more than enough. They held each other while the morning sun climbed higher, and Ethan felt something settle deep in his chest. The future was still uncertain. Morrison wasn't in custody yet. The ranch's fate wasn't secure. A trial could take months. But Clara was here, in his arms, choosing him the same way he was choosing her. And that made everything else manageable. Hayes came out an hour later. Federal Marshal just wired back. They're sending agents to arrest Morrison today. Should be in Tucson by nightfall. We should be there, Ethan said. No need. They've got it handled. Hayes smiled. Your part in this is done. Go home. Save that ranch you've been fighting for. They rode out that afternoon, and Ethan found himself constantly reaching for Clara's hand, needing to touch her, to confirm she was real and beside him and his. She seemed to understand, because she kept touching him back. Small gestures that said more than words could. By the time they reached Iron Creek Ranch, it was evening, and young Danny came running out to meet them. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, thank God you're back. His face was panicked. There's a man here, says he's from the bank. He's got papers. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of papers? Foreclosure. The voice came from the porch, where a well-dressed man in a suit stood holding a document. I'm afraid this property is being seized for unpaid debts. That's impossible, Clara said. We've been making payments. Under your previous agreement, yes.
But that agreement was invalidated when Judge Morrison discovered irregularities in your marriage certificate. The banker smiled coldly. Since your marriage was deemed fraudulent, your household exception no longer applies. The ranch reverts to the bank, which means it reverts to our primary investor, Thomas Morrison. Ethan felt the world tilt. After everything they'd done, after exposing Morrison's crimes and securing testimony, he was still going to lose the ranch through legal manipulation. "You can't do this," he said. "I can, and I am. You have 24 hours to vacate the property." The banker tipped his hat. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, but business is business." He left, and Ethan stood in his own yard, feeling everything he'd fought for slip away. Clara's hand found his. "We'll fight this," she said. "How? Morrison owns the judge, owns the bank, probably owns half the lawyers in the territory." Ethan wanted to break something. Even with federal charges pending, he can still destroy us through legal channels. "Then we go around legal channels," Clara's voice hardened. "Danny, saddle fresh horses. We're riding back to Copper Springs." "Clara, it's over." "It's not over until I say it's over." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "Morrison wants this ranch? He's going to have to take it from both of us, and I don't lose gracefully." They rode through the night, pushing hard, and reached Copper Springs just after dawn. Hayes was at his desk, and his face fell when he saw them. "Let me guess, Morrison made a move on the ranch." "Through the bank. Fraudulent marriage claim invalidating our household exception." Clara slapped the foreclosure notice on his desk. "Is there any legal way to stop this?" Hayes scanned the document. "Not through territorial courts. Morrison's already covered that angle." He paused. "But there might be another way." That evidence Lansing provided. It includes records of Morrison bribing bank officials to manipulate loan terms. If we can prove this foreclosure is part of that pattern, then it's fraud and the seizure is invalid. Clara's mind was racing. "But we'd need to move fast. We have less than 24 hours. "I'll wire the federal agents in Tucson. If they can arrest the bank president before the foreclosure goes through." "Do it," Ethan stood. "Whatever it takes." The next 18 hours were agony. They waited in Hayes's office while telegrams flew back and forth. The federal agents arrested Morrison at noon. The news came by wire, along with confirmation that the cattle baron was being held without bail. But the bank foreclosure was still moving forward, processed by subordinates who claimed ignorance of any fraud. "It's not going to work," Ethan said as the deadline approached. "Even with Morrison in custody, the legal machinery is already in motion." Then a new telegram arrived. Hayes read it twice before looking up, his expression stunned. "The territorial governor just issued an emergency order. All property transactions connected to Morrison's businesses are frozen, pending federal investigation." He handed the telegram to Ethan. "Your foreclosure is suspended indefinitely." Ethan felt his knees go weak. "We're saved?" "For now. Eventually there'll be a trial, legal proceedings to untangle Morrison's web. But your ranch is safe." Hayes smiled. "You won, Hale. Against impossible odds, you actually won." Clara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and Ethan pulled her into his arms. They stood like that, just holding each other, while the reality of what they'd accomplished washed over them. "We should go home," Clara said finally. "Make sure Danny hasn't burned the place down." They rode back to Iron Creek Ranch as the sun was setting, and Ethan felt like he was seeing his land for the first time. This place that had been a burden, a prison of responsibility and grief, now looked like possibility. Because Clara was beside him, and together they'd saved it. Danny met them at the gate, whooping with joy.
I heard the news. The whole town's talking about how you took down Morrison." "Not just us," Clara said. "But yes, it's over." They spent the evening settling back in, and Ethan found himself watching Clara move through the house, their house, with new awareness. She belonged here, not because a judge had forced her to come, but because she'd earned every inch of this land through her own strength and courage. Later, after Danny had gone home and the house was quiet, Ethan found Clara on the porch. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The future." She glanced at him. "Morrison's in prison. The ranch is safe. We're actually married. So now what?" "Now we build something real." Ethan sat beside her. "We fix the things that need fixing. We make this ranch profitable. And we figure out how to be partners in every sense of the word." "That's very practical." "I learned from the best." He took her hand. "But there's something else. Something I need to say before we move forward." "Ethan, when you showed up here, I saw you as a solution to a problem. Then I saw you as a complication I didn't want to deal with. But now," he turned to face her fully, "now I see you as the reason I survived all of this. Not just the business with Morrison, but the last 8 years of grief and isolation. You saved me, Clara. And I know I'm not easy to love. And I know I'm going to mess this up regularly. But I'm asking you to stay anyway. Not because of legal papers, but because you want to." "I want to." Clara squeezed his hand. "But I need you to understand something too. I'm not going to be a traditional rancher's wife. I'm going to keep managing the books, making decisions, challenging you when I think you're wrong. I'm going to be your partner, your equal, not just your helper." "Good. I wouldn't want it any other way. And when we fight, because we will fight, I need you to actually talk to me instead of shutting down." "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." She leaned against him. "We are going to build something amazing here, Ethan. Not just a successful ranch, but a real partnership. The kind that's strong enough to survive anything." "We already survived Morrison. What else could possibly threaten us?" "Each other, probably." But she was smiling. "The real challenge isn't fighting external enemies. It's learning to be vulnerable with each other, to trust each other with our fears and dreams and all the messy parts we usually hide." "I'm not good at vulnerable." "Neither am I." Clara kissed him softly. "But we're going to learn together, starting now." They sat on that porch for hours, talking about everything. Their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for the future. Clara told him about the boarding house she'd run, about the loneliness of being invisible in a city full of people. Ethan told her about his father's death, about the weight of trying to honor a legacy he wasn't sure was worth honoring. "Your father made mistakes," Clara said gently. "But he also gave you something worth fighting for. You've just been fighting for the wrong reasons." "What should I be fighting for?" "For yourself. For us. For the life we're going to build together." She stood and pulled him up. "Starting tomorrow, we're going to transform this ranch. Not to prove something to your father's memory, but to create something that's ours. New systems, new income streams, new ways of doing things. We're going to make Iron Creek Ranch the most successful operation in the territory." "That's ambitious." "I don't do anything by half measures, Mr. Hale. You should know that by now." They walked inside, and Ethan found himself looking at his house with new eyes. The kitchen Clara had organized, the records she'd sorted, the systems she'd implemented, all of it was evidence of her investment in their shared future. She'd taken his broken, struggling ranch and turned it into something with potential. But more than that, she'd taken his broken, struggling heart and made it whole again. That night, lying in bed, Ethan listened to Clara breathing beside him and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the empty quiet of isolation, but the deep contentment of knowing he wasn't alone anymore. He had a partner, an equal, someone who would fight beside him through whatever challenges came next. "Ethan?" Clara's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yeah." "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me in. For trusting me. For choosing me even when you didn't have to." She rolled to face him. "I know it wasn't easy for you." "It was the easiest thing I've ever done." He pulled her closer. "Once I stopped being an idiot about it." She laughed. "Well, you're still an idiot. But you're my idiot now." "Lucky me." "Lucky us." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and Ethan dreamed of the future for the first time in years. Not anxious dreams about failure and loss, but hopeful ones about growth and partnership and love. When he woke at dawn, Clara was already up, making breakfast and humming to herself. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her, and something clicked into place in his chest. This was what he'd been missing all along. Not just another person in his space, but the right person. Someone who made him better, stronger, more complete. Clara had walked into his life as a legal obligation and become the reason he wanted to keep living. "Are you going to stand there all morning, or are you going to help?" Clara asked, without turning around. "How did you know I was here?" "I always know where you are." She glanced over her shoulder, smiling. "It's like I've developed a sixth sense for tracking stubborn ranchers." "That sounds like a terrible superpower." "It has its moments." She plated eggs and handed him a fork. "Now eat. We've got a ranch to rebuild and a future to plan." They spent the morning working together, checking the herds, repairing fences, discussing plans for expansion. Clara's financial projections showed they could be profitable within 18 months if they diversified their income and improved their efficiency. Ethan found himself actually excited about the future instead of just grimly determined to survive it. Over the following weeks, word spread about what had happened with Morrison. Other ranchers who'd been victims of the same scheme started coming forward, and the federal investigation grew larger. Ethan and Clara testified at the trial, and Morrison was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Judge Morrison was removed from the bench and disbarred. The territory started to change. New officials took office. New laws were passed to prevent future corruption. And Iron Creek Ranch became known not just as the place that survived, but as the place that fought back and won. But the real transformation happened quietly, in the daily rhythms of life that Ethan and Clara built together. They argued about the best way to organize the barn, and laughed about Clara's attempts to cook traditional ranch meals. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night. They built something that was bigger than either of them alone, a partnership grounded in respect, strengthened by trust, and sustained by love. One evening, 6 months after Morrison's arrest, Ethan found Clara standing at the edge of their property, looking out over the land that had almost destroyed him. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I made the right choice." She leaned back against him. "Coming here, staying here, choosing you. All of it. Even the part where I was an ass for the first 3 weeks? Especially that part. It made the rest so much sweeter." She turned in his arms. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like lightning. "You're going to have a baby. Our baby." Clara's eyes were bright with tears. "I know we didn't plan this, and I know the ranch is still being rebuilt, but—" Ethan kissed her, cutting off whatever doubts she was about to voice. When he pulled back, he was grinning like an idiot. "This is the best news I've ever gotten." "Really?" "Really." He placed his hand on her stomach, awed. "We're going to be parents." "We're going to be terrible at it," Clara said, but she was smiling. "Probably. But we'll figure it out together." Ethan pulled her close. "Just like we've figured out everything else." They stood there as the sun set over Iron Creek Ranch. Two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. The land stretched out before them. Their land, earned through blood and courage and refusing to give up when everything seemed lost. Ethan thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Bitter, isolated, convinced that strength meant standing alone. That man would have seen this pregnancy as another burden, another responsibility to shoulder without help. But the man he'd become, the man Clara had helped him grow into, saw it differently. He saw possibility. He saw family. He saw a future worth building and protecting and celebrating. "I love you," he said into Clara's hair. "I know," she squeezed him tighter. "And I love you."
More than I ever thought I could love anyone. Even though I'm stubborn and emotionally constipated? Because you're stubborn and emotionally constipated. But you're getting better. She pulled back to look at him. We're both getting better. That's what love does. It doesn't fix everything, but it makes you want to be better than you were. Then I'm going to spend the rest of my life getting better for you. For us, Clara corrected. For this family we're building. Ethan kissed her again, and in that kiss was everything he'd never been able to say with words. Gratitude and wonder, and absolute certainty that against all odds, he'd found exactly where he belonged. Not in the land he'd inherited or the legacy he'd tried to honor, but in the love he'd built with a woman who'd refused to stay out of his way. Clara Whitfield had walked into his life as an old maid no one wanted, and she'd become the only thing he'd ever truly needed. Together, they'd saved a failing ranch and built a partnership stronger than any legal document could create. And now, standing on land they'd fought for and won, with a child on the way and a future full of possibility, Ethan Hale finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him all along. That the only legacy worth leaving is the one you build through love, partnership, and the courage to let someone stand beside you when the world tries to tear you down.